Hi everyone, welcome to BONNIECAROLLEE Makes Cards. I have a set of friendship cards today. These are quick and easy. Nothing makes me happier than spending time blending beautiful colors together, especially when they're finished off with gorgeous silhouette images by Simon Says Stamp. These first three cards have been grouped together because they have been finished off in the exact same way. The first two cards will just go through the inking and stamping. The final card in this set of three will take it right through to completion. All of the cards have been ink blended with Distress Oxide inks on Bristol Smooth cardstock. The blend for this first panel consists of the brand new ink Prize Ribbon, followed by Peacock Feathers, and finished off with Salvaged Patina. The colors are applied several times, extending one color into the next until a smooth blend is achieved. When the two colors meet each other, I lighten my pressure. This allows the tones to soften and not let one color overpower another. The ink colors are applied several times. Some combinations take more work than others. This was one of those combinations. Prize Ribbon is a very saturated, rich blue. It took some effort so that the lighter tones were not upstaged by it. And it was worth it. This is my favorite blend out of all of the cards today. I'm going to be stamping it with one of the two stamps that are found in the Wildflower set. All of the silhouette stamping for this series of cards has been done with VersaFine Black Onyx ink. Even though this is an intense black ink, I still have to stamp all of the images at least 2 times, sometimes 3. The benefits of having a stamping platform. For this particular stamp, there's a lot of area that is being inked up. It took 3 stampings to get that image nice and smooth and lose all that splotchiness. The downside of stamping with this ink is that it can take a very long time to dry. So the heat emboss sentiments didn't happen right away. I left them overnight, tested a couple of panels in the morning, and the embossing powder was still sticking to it. I was busy with another project, so the panels were set aside again for another day. I tried again the next morning, tested them with the embossing powder, and it still was sticking. I spent quite a bit of time applying heat and then used lots of anti-static powder, and then I was finally able to do the embossing. I haven't really experienced this problem before and wonder if it has something to do with the amount of humidity in the air. As I mentioned earlier, Wildflowers comes with 2 silhouette images. I'm using the second one on this card. The ink blended background has been completed with Candied Apple, Picked Raspberry, and KITSCH Flamingo. The Distress Oxide inks can take a while to dry. In this case, not nearly as long as the VersaFine. Always when I'm applying these inks, I use something to protect my panel so that I can avoid finger marks on it. Because the silhouette images are not embossed, there's no waiting time and I can go ahead and do that stamping right away. Like the first stamp, there's quite a bit of area that needs to be inked up. The image does need to be stamped 3 times to get a nice solid silhouette. I like it when the stamp picks up the panel when I open my MISTI door. It's an opportunity for me to give it another good rub. In addition to waiting for the panels to dry before I do the embossing, I'm also waiting before I trim down my panel and do any die cutting. I don't want to smear any of the ink while I'm handling it, but the other thing I don't want to do is to get any of the ink on my dies. I have had an experience or two where I have unwittingly transferred ink onto a new project, usually white cardstock. So here we go. Through the magic of video, this panel is now ready to be embossed. All of the sentiments for the cards in this series are from Simon Says Stamps Inside Friendship Messages. This is a large stamp set with lots of beautiful sentiments. They have all been stamped with Versamark ink and then embossed with Ink on 3's Gold Rush embossing powder. For all of the sentiments that have a larger typeface, I have embossed them twice. Just like this one, the result is a slightly puffy dimensional sentiment. For sentiments with larger print, it also helps smooth them out. I mentioned in the beginning that these 3 cards were all finished off in the same way, so now I'm going to fill in some of the missing gaps. The ink blending for this panel was done with faded jeans, pine needles, and mowed lawn. Because this is a foam-backed red rubber stamp, the insert has been removed from my MISTI. Simon's Botanical Split Background is a beautiful stamp. The stamp for this background is actually made up of 3 separate pieces. Although this card doesn't really demonstrate how this feature can create some unique backgrounds, I do have plans for a future tutorial. These first 3 cards were trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches and die cut with the second largest die in Simon's Stitched Rectangles nesting set. The typeface for this sentiment is also larger and so has been embossed 2 times. I don't emboss sentiments with a finer, smaller text more than once. The embossing already tends to be quite smooth. You run the danger of obliterating those words if you emboss it more than once. And when you're working directly on a panel that you've already put so much work into, I wouldn't run the risk. When the embossing has cooled down completely, I use a microfiber cloth to remove all remnants of the anti-static powder. The rectangular panel with the stitch detail is mounted on black sheet foam. When the panels were die cut with the stitched rectangle die, I made sure that it was well centered in the middle of the panel. I was going to be retaining the border piece because it also has a beautiful stitch detail. With the border in place on the A2 card base, all I have to do is add in my foam-backed panel. This next card features images from the beautiful stamp set Tropical Silhouettes. The background for this card was created with Dusty Concord, Shaded Lilac, and KITSCH Flamingo. A pretty blend of colors to create that tropical vibe. For this card, I'm working with individual stamps. I laid out these leafy images, overlapping them more or less how they were going to be stamped on the panel. The images are stamped 2 times. All of the stamps in this series were cleaned with a stamp cleaner. I use a product by Simon Says Stamp. It can be purchased as a spray or with a dauber end. I like the dauber end, but of course it's all personal preference, isn't it? A baby wipe removes that ink that has been lifted by the stamp cleaner. So one of the positives about polymer stamps in this case is I can lay out my stamps and overlap them, and they're going to hold together so I can remember the positioning. I continue in this manner, stamping each of the leafy images twice until I've created a pretty frame around the top of my panel. As I finish with each stamp, I go through that process of cleaning it off and putting it away before I proceed to the next one. I can be a little bit absent-minded when I'm crafting, and unless I do things right away, it might not happen. I've had the experience of reaching for a stamp that still had residue on it and having it literally ruining my project. So I've learned my lesson. It probably took me a few times, but now I clean as I go. This panel is finished up with a beautiful flamingo and some cute little track marks. The sentiment for this card was going to be stamped directly on the Distress Oxide background, so there were no worries with this one. It was positioned in the open area between the flamingo and the leaf to balance the panel. It was trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches and mounted on black sheet foam. It was adhered to pearl gold cardstock by CITSCH and then mounted onto an A2 sized card base. This card is more simplistic, highlighting the beautiful silhouette image of St. Anne's lace from Simon's Laughing Flowers. The background is a vibrant combination of festive berries, ripe persimmon, and spiced marmalade. Of all the cards, this was the quickest and easiest. Even the ink blending was fast. But like the other cards, the embossed sentiment didn't go on for a couple of days. The panel was trimmed down and die cut with Simon's A2 thin frames. I also die cut pearl gold cardstock so that the gold frame would replace the orange one. The small panel was mounted on black sheet foam. After the border is adhered to the card base, the nozzle of the glue is run along the inside perimeter of it, applying light pressure so that there is a thin stream of glue that the gold frame will catch onto. And then I finish off with a big squiggle of glue down the middle for the foam-backed panel. The frame is quite fine and delicate and needs to be pushed up against the sides of the border. The A2 thin frames die set is a favorite of mine. It adds a beautiful detail that can take a simple card to the next level. With the foam back panel in place, I'm ready to finish up this series of cards. All of the cards were lined up to receive their embellishments. With the exception of one, they were finished off with gold confetti topped with Nouveau Crystal Drops Morning Dew. Nouveau Drops Mustard Gold was used on the card stamped with the split botanical background. Some of the small flowers had open centers which were dotted with the gold. And that wraps up this set of friendship cards featuring beautiful silhouette images by Simon Says Stamp. If you like to lift your friends' spirits by periodically sending them a card, you must check out Simon Says Stamp's Inside Friendship Messages. This large and timeless sentiment set covers off many reasons that you might want to send a friend a card. I just know this is one that I will use often. I hope you enjoyed this set of quick and easy cards, and as always, I appreciate your visit.